leaders of tomorrow here who have come along from Orchard League Junior School, school I really enjoy working with, and it's been really interesting for me. Before we actually get on and talk about the issues and sort of rolling this out in schools and all the rest of it, I wanted to actually just ask some of the students along and just sort of ask their opinions of how they're getting on with this, what they're excited about, and also just for them to show you a few of their sort of creations. We're actually next year thinking of the possibility of doing almost a pupils conference instead of a teachers conference for computer science, and maybe even getting the children come along and show some of their creations to each other. Okay, so we sort of wanted to kick that off a little bit. So, can you just tell us about your process, some of the sort of issues that you had in terms of making it and fixing things?
Well, this game, as you probably saw, is where you have to destroy a spaceship, but you have a limited amount of ammo. So, once you destroy the spaceship, and if you have more than, I think, 5 ammo left, you go on to the bonus level, which is where you have to destroy 2 spaceships instead of just 1. And it was kind of hard to put in the bonus level because when I'd already shared this onto the online Scratch so everybody could see it. And if someone had sort of seen it while I was halfway through putting the bonus level in, they would probably thought that it didn't work. So it was kind of hard to do that.
Do you want to show everybody the code that's inside that? This is Scratch 2.0, and the lovely thing about this is it's got, you can share projects and you can also see other people's code and what they've made in there. How many, I mean, most of you guys are in year 6. How many children do you think in year 6 that have gone on and made themselves account in Scratch 2.0? Any ideas? About 20, and that's a 2-class year group. So about 20 of the kids out of 60 have gone and made themselves online accounts and made some. How about you guys? Who's gone for online accounts here? Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. And I suppose would I be right in saying that actually quite a bit of your computing has been your own self-learning? You know, you going away and trying things and doing stuff. What do you reckon?
Probably make a game. If you know one piece of code, you can make it in, you can pop it in different games and stuff.
So you like that sort of reusable element of it and
If you like one piece of code and you can use that, then you can make it in other stuff as well.
Yeah. What's been your most interesting project that we've done? Because I asked you this earlier.
Well, we had to create a track on the background instead of bug, where you weren't allowed to give it any movement commands, but you had to make it follow around the track without going off the edge or anything.
And what was difficult about that? What was the...
Making it stay on, because every time I was trying to do something, it would go off track or glitch or anything.
And did you work with somebody else with it? Or, Ben, so you two. And did you find sort of working together really good sort of? Yeah. Well, this is one of the other things we find that actually, contrary to a lot of opinion, actually a lot of good programming is done in pairs or in groups, sort of discussing it. You might program individually, but you sort of discuss it and work with somebody else as well, which is really good. Ben, you were saying the sort of maths benefits of this. Do you want to explain some of the sort of maths that you've been doing and using inside a game like this?
The main thing is the coordinates. So if you wanted to make a spaceship move, you had to pick a round coordinate and glide there for a certain amount of seconds. So it wasn't. You had to understand the coordinates that you had to use to make it go where it, instead of just staying in one area, it had to move around the whole screen instead of just going to a set base.
Yeah. It was interesting because I interviewed all these guys and a few other children, and what was interesting to me is actually it was only Ben who actually got that actually there's some real maths in here. Everybody else really were using lots of quite complicated maths. They didn't really realise they were using maths, which is quite interesting to me. Anybody else want to add anything? So have you enjoyed adding a strand of programming and computing into the curriculum? What's been your sort of take on that?
Yeah, I especially like the Lego We Do.
The Lego We Do stuff, yeah, that was really good, wasn't it? Anything else you guys want to add? Do you want to go?
When you find a bug, you fix it, but you also find something you could add into it to make it run smoother.
So that you find the debugging things really useful because it helps you sort of improve the program. Is that what you mean? Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm glad you said that because we were sort of doing that and I was pushing that earlier. Can we give them a big round of applause? No, thank you. That was really, really appreciated. Let's try and go on to that. Now, what we're going to do now is we're just going to get Les Carr to do a little bit on the sort of bigger aspects of why the curriculum has changed, and then I'll go on and talk a little bit more about the sort of issues facing the school and costing issues and training issues and all those sorts of things. Does that sound reasonable? Professor Carr.
I just want to speak really briefly about the kind of background that I see. You see, because although I said at the beginning, because we really wanted to have a change in the computer science curriculum for ages, I went to university in 1982 having done an A-level in computer science and not having had the chance to do an O-level, remember those? And it was, there was a lot of really interesting sort of stuff in there. We did a lot of really interesting work. And universities were just starting to teach computing as a separate thing. Southampton was one of the first to introduce a separate degree in computer studies as opposed to maths with computing, or sort of what it was mainly everywhere else. And I remember my grandfather was furious that I wasn't doing a proper degree like maths or English, well actually English, and going to work for the Foreign Office, because that's what you did if you were doing something proper. And I got interested in computers and I'd seen this, and it was about the time that the BBC Micro was coming out, and we had all that work, and there was this big, I want to say the word explosion, but I always tell my students off for saying the web exploded. There was this big growth in the number of kinds of computers that were available, all sorts of hobbyist things, especially in the UK. The UK was kind of leading the world. It's much more popular than even in the US. And we had lots of different computer platforms, many homegrown. The BBC was one, the Dragon. There are all sorts of things that no one's heard of anymore. And so that was what I wanted to do. And I said that we wanted to improve the curriculum, move it away from just ICT and introduce something new. What's happened particularly is that recently there has been a real move within government, a real acknowledgement that we have to change the way that our economy is structured, from being so reliant almost exclusively on services and oil to rebalancing things. So we have an industry sector, but the opportunities of something like what people now call the digital economy are just huge. And again, in Britain, it turns out we're really good at this. And there's an awful lot of innovation. So there's this report out, the Information Economy Strategy, which the government has produced. Big names there, big hitters putting their names to this. Sort of acknowledgement that the information economy, or the digital economy, as some call it, is transforming the way we live and work, and it's crucial to our country's success. And to our individual connectedness, and it points out we really do have a history of being spectacularly good at this field. Alan Turing, apart from probably having won us the Second World War, it's completely laid down the foundations of modern computing, proved how computing, computing and maths were equivalent, and how every sort of computer was equivalent to every other sort of computer that we could imagine, and he was kind of, we think of, certainly in the discipline such as the father of computing, all the way to Tim Berners-Lee most recently, sort of not only developing the web, his idea for 25 years ago, he created this, he wrote this report, this idea, we could do it like this, we could put our computers together like this, we could make something, I'm going to call it the World Wide Web. Gave it to his boss said, and filed it away. His boss then moved house later, 1 year later, discovered the memo in one of the boxes in his garage, got it out, scrawled on the top, vague, but interesting, vague but exciting, and then gave it back and said, yeah, let's see what you can do with this. And so he went on to actually, to put it into practice. So another great Brit, and we saw him a couple of years ago at the Olympic ceremony, with that message, this is for everyone. So created it and gave it away for free to the world. And we want to capitalise on this, this strand that we've always been good at in Britain of innovation and invention, and really trying to take it somewhere with the digital economy. And so this government report is all about changing our education system to help us focus on developing creators of technology, not just people who use other people's technology. And that's really what a lot of the oomph for putting computer science into the curriculum has been about. It's been about wresting control back from just being victims of Microsoft, well, I shouldn't say that, being passive consumers of Microsoft Office and just doing what we're allowed to do and working out new things. And so the whole smartphone revolution, the way this development of apps, games, just a really significant part of what we're developing in our information economy. We're really good at games, we're really good at movies, CGI, and things like this, and we really need to capitalise on this. And so we see the the moves when it comes to higher education and people coming to university and choosing their jobs and deciding they want to, instead of saying, oh, I just want to go and work as an analyst for Goldman Sachs or something like that. Students, there's much more impetus now. I want to go and start my own company. I want to have a startup. I want to create a new web empire. One of the guys from this university created Last FM, a streaming music thing, 10 years ago. And so we need more of that, and we want that understanding, not just, oh yes, you can do it by coding this, putting that in the curriculum, but putting that idea that we're in control of our technology, we can create things, we can solve problems, we can have great ideas, and we can make them happen. I mean, I was just blown away by that. Well, not literally, I wasn't, trying to me. Although, teacher instead of rocket ship, very popular. But that's amazing to see that so we can produce that right early on in the curriculum. It is really good news. And for us, the big challenge is if you start to implement these changes to the curriculum, and your students start to be able to do those kinds of things right at Key Stage 2. What on earth are they going to be able to do by the time they come to university? What are we going to teach them? What will they be capable of? And so that's a really exciting challenge for us. And what effect will they have on industry? That's the big picture for us.
Thank you. Thanks, Les. Right. Okay. do you know, before I sort of get on and talk about some of the issues, one of the things that's really, really, really excited me is just the level of challenge. I mean, I was an ICT AST for quite a few years before I got into this. And I always found some really interesting ICT projects. You know, we did vlogging in school, I loved it, it really engaged the children. But what we've been doing with the computer science has taken some of those children off on such a high level of things. Okay, and that's probably the thing I want to sort of start with, really. If you invest in some training and some time for your staff, all right, especially, now this is not an elitist subject, this is open to everybody and everybody achieves. But at your top end, you will see a massive sort of rise in stuff. Now I'm going to embarrass some of these guys here. Actually, some of what they're doing in year 6 and year 5 is actually not far off of GCSE level in computing. All right, and that is down. It's down to giving them a little bit of a starter and helping them, but actually it's also down. It's down to actually them going and self-learning. Because we've got this idea that actually they've got to fix stuff themselves, and thank you very much for mentioning that. I didn't, you know, and that actually you learn something from fixing stuff. You know, they've got that idea, they're taking that into their own sort of self-study as well. And that is just been so exciting, seeing what they produce. I go into every school I go into, and people say, I'm walking across the playground and somebody says, hey, do you know, I made this week, or I did this, or I've been mucking around with this, and actually that's just absolutely wonderful to see, and that's not stuff that's done in the class, that's them taking their learning on outside of this. And that's been really exciting, so thank you guys, because you're cheering me up. No way. Okay. Thanks for those. Now, I'm not going to go into really, you know, we did that really in the last session, sort of some of the sort of aspects of this, of the curriculum, but just to say you pretty much can, that's probably the worst slide in existence. They say you should never put more than 14 words on a slide. But it just goes to show you can put the whole computing curriculum on one slide. You know, so there's not actually a lot written down there, but there is actually, actually I've got out a phase with myself a little bit here. Let's just go through this briefly. Okay, we do have obviously all our old key stage when it comes to our digital literacy stuff. So I think it's important. We're not saying throw away stuff. Okay, all of that, there's still a justification. And I think you pretty much got that from the last two of us in the last session. Okay, there's lots of stuff you can keep and reuse, and that's cool. Okay, and there's some of the other bits as well from the digital literacy side of Key Stage 2. We talked about the programming burger this morning, and we talked about the internet and side salad. Okay, and we talked about some of the algorithms and unplugged activities that help. So really, most important bit of this session is what are the challenges for a school in terms of implementing this and moving on. Do you know, I think probably the biggest challenge probably comes down to actually staff knowledge to start with. You know, and let's not knock ourselves. The truth is that there's good reasons why we haven't had this knowledge. Up to this point, all of this would have only been done at undergraduate level. So, you know, if you were in the school system in the last 20 or 30 years yourself, you would not have done, unless you were in a very small select of schools, you would not really have done any proper computing or computer science aspects of it. So, and actually, most of our teachers are in that, you know, in that sort of situation. So there is a massive gap in staff knowledge. All right. Now, you know, there are things like the LACE booklet, which we've mentioned quite a few times, which is a really good sort of self-tool. I talked about my website. Okay, but I'd also encourage you to use some of the skills of some of the people around. I mean, I work for eLearning Teach. Okay. Also, you saw Phil over here is running some CAS stuff in this area, and I run stuff as well. Okay, I would actually say that actually people do need to be trained. You do need to invest some time. In fact, when we come to actually looking at equipment, you'll see that actually, equipment-wise, you can do a lot of this for free. You know, a lot of the software is for free. But actually, when it comes down to actually training, that's the bit you can't really do yourself. I'll give you an example. About 5-6 years ago, I picked up Scratch. And I thought I did what I normally do in a lot of programs. I pick it up and I play with it. Okay, and I thought, well, okay, you know, I'm an ICT AST, you know, I must be able to master Scratch. Okay, and after about 2 hours, I thought to myself, I don't get this, I don't really understand what it's on about, you know, and I just left it. Because actually, there are some bits of this that you actually need to have taught to you, or you need to go and find out exactly how it works. It's not something that someone's going to pick up and just go, well, I've done some other ICT, I get that. And certainly when I'm talking to head teachers in Hampshire, one of the things I have to explain is, you know, this is not, the strand of computing science is not ICT. It is very different. And there does need to be some training for your staff if they're going to, you know, realistically come to this. And part of that training comes around actually understanding a lot of the terminology and what things mean. Okay? Even worse slide. But actually, it illustrates, if you see all these little red bits, you probably can't even read it, and that's fine, but it just illustrates how many new words there are. Now, actually, children cope with new words, we know that from all the phonics. My daughter's in year, she's 6, and she comes home and tells me all sorts of things, and I have to go and ask my wife for a bit of an explanation. Okay? Because actually, she's learnt some really interesting, you know, ways of decoding using some of the new phonics teaching. And actually, I have to say, her reading is actually really quite good. Okay, so I'm not saying I'm not going to make a big thing about that. You know, it's not my area of expertise, but it's certainly working for her. My son, 8-year-old, again, that's another issue. But let's not get into that. All right. But there's a lot of new understanding here, and having some of that explained to you, I think, is quite important. So probably my first thing would be to encourage you to not so much to invest in lots of software or lots of stuff, but actually to just invest in some training. You know, because actually that does make a real difference. You know, people like Phil or myself and getting us out and doing some stuff in your schools. All right, we're very reasonably priced, aren't we? Especially in the south. Anywhere in the south of England, we're very reasonably priced. We save all the expensive stuff when we have to travel hundreds of miles.
If we can cycle there, it's even cheaper.
Sorry?
If we can cycle there.
Exactly.
So where can you go to find information about looking?
My website's got my email address on it. You can just contact me, and see Phil afterwards, and he'll give you his email address as well. Okay.
You can go to the CAS events page.
Yes,
as well.
yeah, you can. Yeah, definitely. So, cheers, guys. On that sort of theme of actually training people, then obviously we've got the understanding of what the stuff means, that's important, but then we get into the sort of programming side. And I would suggest to you that very few people will pick this up just from playing it. I mean, from my classes, if I had 30 children, I might find 1 or 2 could probably sit there and puzzle it, and we'll get there. But the 28, 29, 30 others wouldn't. And actually, I would argue that actually even a bigger percentage when it comes to teachers. Why wouldn't I say it's a big percentage? It's not because we're not as intelligent as the children, but just because actually we have our mindset in a certain way. We're older, okay? There's a bit more flexibility of mind the younger you are. We know that from psychology research and all the rest of it. Okay, so children often pick some of this up. We're coming at it quite a long way after our sort of our thinking processes are set. And we can change that, we can adapt that, but you do need some training to help you with that. Okay. I have a couple of models that I use. Inset days are great, but actually if you haven't got that sort of money in your curriculum, another model that you can use is this one. First of all, we get everybody starting at the same level. So, you know, and people say to me, yeah, but I don't want my year 6s to be doing the same thing as my year 2s. But actually, if you think about it, they've done nothing else beforehand. So actually, it's a little bit like trying to jump them up ahead and go right in at a high level. It's a bit like saying, right, okay, we're going to do some long multiplication now, but you haven't even got a number system. All right, so one of the real benefits for this is actually you can start everybody at the same level. Now, okay, a project that you do in year 3 might take 3 weeks to do. you know, 3 hourly sessions or whatever, you know, however you organise it. In year 6 you might do 45 minutes. Okay, but still, everybody needs that sort of, those baseline and those simple understandings to start with. So actually, a good way of doing this would be to do something like a staff meeting, or to do a little, everybody makes something, works a little project, okay, and then everybody goes and tries that out with their classes for the next 4 weeks, or, you know, a period of time. And then comes back, 4, 5, 6 weeks, you know what it's like, you have to fit into whatever calendar the school can manage. Okay, somebody else does another little, you do another little project with the school, and then you go and roll that out. And now at certain points, it might be that you'll leave certain year groups behind. You know, if I was in a primary school, there's some really basic projects I think you could pretty much do from year 2 all the way up to year 6. But then, of course, when you get a complex project, you probably leave year 2 behind, and then you leave year 3 behind, and then, you know, but everybody would still be making those projects and doing that stuff, because let's be honest, we never know where people is going to be in the long run. Now, here's the thing. We have this mentality with ICT that, in some ways, training people is a wasted time. And the reason we have that mentality is because ICT changes all the time. You know, we've constantly got this stream of new programs, new ideas coming in and changing. So of course, investing in training people, you think, well, I've trained them on that. Who remembers learning platforms? Oh, we all went and did loads of training on learning platforms, and now pretty much those schools, well, some schools use it, but a lot less. You know? So the problem is, we interpret and we do the same thinking when it comes to computing, which is actually not very helpful at all, because the computing part hasn't really changed, okay, since people actually codified it properly in the sort of 1950s. In real terms, things like repetition, things like selection, things like sequence, they're actually almost the same. And when I do training sessions on Logo, and I have older teachers coming who, I was going to say, who remembers teaching some Logo? And actually, a lot of teachers go, oh yeah, I remember doing this. And actually, nothing had really changed, because actually, this is persistent knowledge. Okay, it's there. So actually investing in training your staff on the computing science aspects of the curriculum is something that, yes, new programming language will come up to express that, but the core understanding of how these things work is still going to be there in 10, 15, 20 years' time. Okay? So, from a management point of view, it makes sense to actually invest in some computing science training, because actually you're investing in something that's going to be around for a heck of a long time. Does that make sense? Brilliant. I hope I haven't laboured that one too much. I have got a sort of I don't know, if you were to take that approach, all right, I do have a scratch plan, and I do have plans for all of these things, okay, so I like to give people something to take away, all right, so things like the smoking car, music machine, maths quiz, which uses selection, so we're pushing up a little bit. Do you guys remember doing the maths quiz? Yeah, and who went home and made their own quiz afterwards pretty quickly? Yeah, all of them. So they didn't just stay with what I wanted them to do, they went home and readapted and replanned it. And actually, I've seen all sorts of strange interpretations of quizzes, that's been brilliant. Slug trail, which is a little game, very simple little game. Counting machine. Can we get the computer to count? And introduces the idea of variable inside a loop. All right, and the kids thoroughly enjoy doing that one as well. And there's loads of others on there if you don't like those ones. But I pushed that out because it's nice to just sort of give some stuff that's there that you can take away if that's useful for you. In Hampshire, we're looking next year at working with teachers, either virtually or going and working in clusters of teachers and doing something like this with a whole group of teachers, and then giving them half a term to go and do, and then doing it again. And we'd be more than happy to work outside of Hampshire and do that in a cluster of your schools as well. Okay, so I throw that one out to you if it's useful to you. Okay. The other big thing it was interesting, Les mentioned how much the computing curriculum in the past was a part of the maths curriculum. Okay. And I mentioned earlier that actually when we interviewed a lot of the children, they didn't really associate what they were doing with maths. And yet, almost every programme, apart from, actually pretty much everything from sort of year 3 stuff upwards has had quite a lot of maths content in there. Okay, so they don't actually associate. Now, what's been really exciting with me is I've seen some children, I mean, I work in 2 of my schools, so I work modelling every single lesson. And I've had children come up with really quite complex maths solutions to things, and the teacher's gone, what's that? He's in my middle maths group. He's never done anything mathematical whatsoever. Okay, and they've been really quite shocked at the high level of thinking and logical thinking and where they were willing to take that on. Now, you know, I'm not drawing correlations from just one thing, but I have seen it in more than one school. And there are children who actually, I think, are not that interested in the number system, but are interested in the logic behind it and how it works and proving things. And a lot of the programming can be used to prove maths ideas as well. Some of the things that we've been doing in Year 6 in Orchard Lee and some of the other schools, we've been writing programs to calculate angles. What was exciting for me is we wrote a little bit of that, and then these guys went on and took it massively off. They made all sorts of extra things. Okay, we did. Do you remember the coordinates session we did with that? Actually, there were two people here who went so far off the end of my curriculum. I was struggling at the end just to give them extra challenge because they were really stretchy. Probably the most interesting way I've ever taught Cartesian coordinates. Okay, in terms of reflecting ideas and when you see the X and Y in the block and change it. Do you guys manage to do some of that reflection while you were? Yep. And do you enjoy that lesson? Things like getting a computer to work out the change or the counting program. If I'm honest, I feel like I've just, and pardon the pun, I've only really scratched the surface with Scratch and maths curriculum. I think that I sat down with the new maths curriculum and I was almost in one page. I thought, oh, we could turn that into a program, do that as a program. It's actually almost endless, really. So I would encourage you, if by buying into this and taking the time to actually train teachers, I think you could also be benefiting your maths curriculum as well. Right. And I think and I'd love to run some proper research on this, so I'm not saying I have, it's much too early, but I would be very interested to see whether there is some real research behind that. Certainly my anecdotal evidence would be quite interesting to look at. We talked about debugging earlier, and I think I probably laboured that till it goes out of fashion, but it is really important, so changing people's minds for that, and thank you very much for your little comment. Let's just really briefly mention some of the equipment, because let's be honest, if you're a senior manager, there's a good chance that someone's going to come and go, hey, buy this, and it'll be the fix-all and the most wonderful thing for your stuff. Hello? Yeah, you're ringing in the middle of a lecture. Thank you, bye. Okay. Bless. So, some of the equipment. That was quite interesting. B-bots. I can't say, when Emma and I have been talking to schools, we've sometimes had people say, oh yeah, we've done B-bots, and we've said, well, how many B-bots have you got? Okay, and they've gone, oh, 2. Well, actually, you do need enough to work in small groups. Okay, for me, they are a no-brainer. Now, sometimes we get people saying they're not complex enough, they don't do enough. Actually, that's about the instructions that you give and the way that you use for the children. I'm not saying you can't take your children on a bit further than this, but I'm saying actually you can do some really quite interesting work with this. Okay. Probots. The guys are running a session on Probots. Lovely little programmable Carr. They don't do everything in the curriculum, but they do. It's wonderful for children to write an algorithm, think of a sequence instruction, program it into a device, and actually see it physically move and do that. Okay, and there's some real benefits. Okay, and I would say that they are probably something that's worth adding, worthwhile. Rollers. Who remembers Romans? They great big round things that you've probably got one festering in the back cupboard somewhere, you know, dying a death. All right, well, you know, Roma 2, they've actually made a new set. Now, if I was a primary school and I didn't have any robots at all, I would actually be quite tempted by the Roma, probably even not even buying the V-bots and the other bits. Why? Because you've got these attachable tops to them. So you can, in effect, the top attachable top pretty much does what the B-bot does. Okay, and then when you take that off, you can use a more complex one for some of the work further up the school. So I quite like that idea. So, you know, equipment I think is probably worth investing in if you want to. I'm not saying you can do pretty much, especially the Key Stage 2 curriculum, you can do most of it without your kit. Shouldn't say that, should I? But these things do add more excitement and enjoyment into the children. Lego We Do. I'm running a little thing straight after this. It's interesting, you guys probably, was the Lego We Do probably one of the best modules we did?
Yeah.
Yeah, and these guys have got loads of other programming. Why? Because actually, we pretty much open planned the Lego. In year 5 and 6 when I do this project, I don't tell them, I just say, right, we're going to make a fan. I don't tell them how to build the fan. I have some design things, it's got to be solid enough that it's not going to whiz off and, you know, all the rest of it, and we checked that before we allowed anyone to do any programming. I didn't show them any pictures either, because I didn't want them copying each other. And they all came up with different designs for fans. Okay, and then because now, the Lego We Do, the We Do software is rubbish. Sorry, Lego, but it is. But it plugs into Scratch. Alright, and that is where it's brilliant. And really, really worth doing, because the children can use all the things they've done from Scratch and the bits of programming they've learnt elsewhere, okay, to use and make those things. Raspberry Pis and iPads. Now, I'm really loath to say that something's not a brilliant idea. I actually love the Raspberry Pis, and I'm doing some work in year 6 with one of the schools that I'm going to be working with next year. But, and it is a but, in your early stages of what you're doing here with you know, getting teachers, I think this is a pretty scary device when it comes to Key Stage 2 teachers who have never done any programming before. Okay, so if you know, great as an extension something once you've done some other things in a year or two's time, but I would be a bit wary of going out and buying 30 Raspberry Pis unless you've got a specialist in your school who can really make some use. Kids will probably enjoy them, and kids will do some brilliant stuff on them. Okay, and kids who take them home and do some stuff will do some great stuff as well. But I hear lots of things where teachers and schools have bought these and they haven't really got anybody who actually knows how to roll it out and help the kids with it. And that's a bit of a waste in my view. iPads. I love the Apple devices. Okay, I was one of the first schools to have iPod touches in school. I think they're a brilliant digital literacy device. Okay, there still is only a limited amount of programming that you can do on an iPad. So one of the things that curriculum talks about is a variety of devices. And I would encourage you to have a variety of devices. And it does worry me a little bit where some primary schools have bought all iPads and gone totally away from anything else. Okay, I worry about that a little bit, because actually there is aspects of the computing curriculum where we'll really be able to take away in those open-ended ways. However, we've thoroughly enjoyed doing a bit of stuff with touch develop, haven't we? Which works really well on the iPad. You know, maybe things will move on in a few years. But certainly at the moment. So I'm not saying don't buy those, that's not for me to say at all. I'm just saying have a variety of devices and be aware about just having one thing. Okay, because there's some aspects of the computing curriculum you're going to struggle with, especially in Key Stage 2. Okay. Right, got a few minutes. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to the next session? Anybody? Please, even if you don't have, if you get home and think of a question, my email address is on the back of my website, and I will do my best to answer your question if I can. Okay? Thank you very much for listening.